So this is where I was. This is where I previously was, right? I was checking out the chapter 4 or chapter 2, but that's actually not where I was. But regardless, it should be where you were. Oh, so I said preview chapter 2. That's why. So let's go ahead. Sorry about that. I'll preview it again, and then we'll kind of wander around there as a student, so you guys can get a feel for where things are. So yeah, so you have this kind of. It's a very different view with this side where you can go to the table of contents. You can leave the smart book, right? Oh man, okay, sorry. Student view, is that how it's gonna be? Cool. But you guys see this by default, I have found, right? So this is what you see. So you just see things that are due in the next 7 days. So then because of the fact that like everything's kind of staggered, you can kind of get caught unawares about things, right? So the way to kind of also look at things is you can go to the calendar. Well, no, that's not the best. You go to classes, and then you click on this class. Like this is kind of the way that if I was a student, I would be kind of taking a look at things, right? So this will tell me, okay, the week 1 stuff that's due August 24th, that's tonight at 11:59, right? And then I've got all this week 2 stuff that it like doesn't show up in my to-do, right? Because it's not due within 7 days, but it's still there. It'll show up tomorrow because then it'll be within 7 days. Does that make sense? But it's always there. You can work ahead. I don't like close anything out. Does that make sense, everybody? So there's also these video reviews in addition to the quizzes, right? So I assign them because I think they're good. And then we'll have, you know, the Learn Smarts for the next week, right? So the chapter 4 and the chapter 5, Learn Smart there. So any questions about that or accessing that? Okay, cool. And once again, if you happen to find one of these Learn Smarts is like really long, right? Like we'll click on this one, it says, takes about 15 minutes, right? We'll click on one down here. It'll say, takes about 15 minutes. So if you're in the middle of one and it's not taking you about 15 minutes or whatever, right? Like just send me an email. I probably just fudged it, you know, and just like didn't change the settings. Does that make sense, everybody? So don't sit there and just like be infuriated at me. Just like send an email and don't worry about it. And we'll talk about it the next day in class. Okay, cool. So that's kind of that. And that's going to be where we're doing, you know, we're doing our quizzes, right? That's where we're going to be doing our first exam, right? So this is, again, we'll have a week to do this. So starting September 10th, or we'll have 4 days, sorry. So starting September 10th, which is, I think, a Monday, right? No, Thursday. September 10th to Monday the 14th. So we'll have from a Thursday to a Monday night in order to do this exam, which is going to be, you know, it's going to cover the chapters 1 through 7. And so we do all this stuff through Connect. As soon as you guys get it done, I pop it over into CSC Online, and that way you get a good impression of your current grade. Any questions on that? Cool. Awesome. So, just wanted to talk real quick about, so what if, so remember we talked about trading and things like that, right? And we talked about the production possibility curve, right? And, oh, of course, sorry guys. And so we know that it's an illustration of the combination of two goods with the given resources, right? So the book also has this example. So we have some definitions here, right? We talked about, you know, unobtainable or infeasible, right? And how those are kind of the same thing. We talked about, you know, points A, B, C, and D. Those are all efficient points, combinations. And the reason why we have this frontier is the scarcity principle. At the end of the day, there's only so many resources, right? There's only so many, you know, acres of land that we can plant coffee or nuts. And as a result, we have to make a choice between what we have. We have to give up one good to get another, right? We had to give up, playing frisbee golf to be in class or whatever the case may be, right? Or playing video games or watching more of the show that we're binging on Netflix. Like there's something that we gave up to be here. There's something that we're always giving up for something else. So what if we had like a one-woman economy, right? What if it was just Susan and she's just producing coffee and nuts? So instead of 8 hours a day like before, she's got 6 hours a day. And again, this is just a kind of very simple example so we can talk about why specialization in trade is actually helpful, right? And so she works 6 hours a day. She can produce 4 pounds of coffee or 2 pounds of nuts, right? She's twice as productive at coffee than she is at nuts. She's just had more experience with it or whatever, right? And so since 6 hours a day, 4 pounds of coffee, 6 times 4 is what? 24. That means that our maximum here is going to be 24, right? In terms of if she just spent her whole day, picking coffee or processing coffee or whatever, right? That's how much she would get. 2 pounds of nuts, we could just take that and divide it by half since we know she's half as productive. We could also just go ahead and say 6 hours times 2 pounds of nuts per hour gives us 12 nuts per day, right? So we have a negative slope because of the fact that this is a trade-off. We have to give something up, right? There's a marginal cost that's constant throughout here in terms of, to get 4 nuts, we have to give up 8 coffee pounds. And so we can also simplify that to the opportunity cost of 1 extra nut is giving up 2 coffee pounds. You can flip it, but let's not confuse ourselves. All right, so now we got Tom. We got a separate book, right? And again, this is all the same stuff that's in your book, so you don't have to take like terribly close notes, so you can just kind of refer back to your ebook or whatever about it. So Tom, he's got a different production possibility curve, right? He's got keen eyes, and so Tom actually, he's really good at the nuts, right, rather than coffee. Okay, so Tom has a completely opposite situation where twice as effective at processing, roasting, whatever the nuts compared to the coffee, and so as a result, his opportunity cost of 1 coffee is going to be 2 nuts, and likewise, his opportunity cost of 1 nut is a half of coffee compared to Susan's, which was 2 pounds of coffee. Now, if we put these two together, this is really kind of the driving force behind why we are specializing, why we're trading, right? So this is showing the comparative advantage that essentially, since Sue's curve is steeper, it's better for coffee, right? The steeper curve means that her opportunity cost is going to be cheaper. Tom's curve is flatter, meaning that his opportunity cost is not necessarily going to be as low for whatever's on this y-axis. And so his opportunity cost is going to be on the axis that he's kind of closer to. You can think about it like that if you want to think about the mnemonic, right? Since he's flatter, he's closer to that one. That's going to be the one that he's specializing in. So to get 1 coffee, Sue gives up a half of nuts, and Tom gives up 2 nuts, right? And so as a result, since this is a cost, we always want to minimize our costs, right? And so we want Sue to be the one that's specializing in producing the coffee. And so without trade, let's say that they decide that they're just going to produce a little bit, half nuts, half coffee, so no trade. Each one of them is going to produce, what, 8 and 8 or something? But if they specialize in it, and if Sue just produces coffee, and Tom just produces nuts, then each person can get 12 pounds of each good, right? So by specializing in each one and then trading, you're able to get outside of your production possibility curve. And so this is like one of the classical economic arguments this guy David Ricardo made about corn way back when England was like kind of still this like feudal imperial power, and they were trying to like put all these tariffs on foreign competition and stuff, right? And he was trying to say, no, that's actually not the way to be prosperous. The way to be prosperous is to kind of, specialize in what we're good at and be open to trade from abroad. And as a result, our citizens, the consumers, right? Because at the end of the day, everybody's a consumer. If you're a laborer, if you're a capitalist, you're a consumer, right? And so the consumers, which at the end of the day is kind of the broadest group in economics, end up enjoying more as a result. So with no trade, right? They 5 nuts and 5 coffee each, but with trade, 10 nuts and 10 coffee each. Oh, that's just a different one. So instead of 24, that was just a different example. But we don't really have time for it. All right. So again, why do I always draw these curves as bowed out, right? Well, the reason why I draw them as bowed out is because what we learned at the end of class, we learned that different resources are, better suited to different kinds of things, right? And so the same kind of land that's suited for ranching or suited for this agriculture is not going to be well suited for making factories or something like that, right? The same kind of people that are well suited for working in food processing plants or working in the bread plant or whatever that's in Denver, are not going to be as good as working in the tech center or something like that, right? And so just different resources are going to be good for different reasons. And yeah, so as a result, it's not this flat thing. The more that we specialize in something, right, the more that we kind of try to push the envelope, the harder it is to get that extra little bit of juice out of the orange. Does that make sense? There's a low-hanging fruit principle kind of going on here. And so when we're kind of in this, golden zone in between, in the middle here, you can see where but when we're in here, our trade-off, our kind of slope doesn't change terribly a ton, right? But as we can see, to get that same 10 right here, we go from 95 to 100 or whatever, and the same 10, or actually, this is just saying for two extra 1,000 nuts a day, because of the fact that we're kind of reaching that upper limit, right? Just there's no more arable land that, in climates that are amenable to this kind of production, or the people that we keep hiring for it, they just don't know what the heck they're doing, and they keep on just screwing up and sending through nuts that are rotten or whatever, right? And just ruining the batch. We can't find good laborers that are well suited to whatever the task is that we need. And so for whatever reason, we're giving up, it's going from 20 to 15, sorry, a little typo. 20 to 15, so we're giving up 5,000 pounds of coffee production every day, and we're only getting 2,000 pounds of nuts, whereas that same 5,000 when we were at a kind of a better mix at point B, right, that same 5,000 gave us 10,000 extra pounds of nuts. And so the reason why we got so much nuts is because at that point we were really kind of focused on coffee, right? And so we were kind of freeing up some resources that we were trying to kind of force into being productive in this way that maybe they're not that productive. Okay, questions on that? Should be mostly a review from what we talked about. Cool. I think that's all I want to talk about in chapter 2. Move on. Perfect. So this is really the crux of economics here, is supply and demand, okay? So the production possibility frontier is this model that we teach y'all because essentially it has one line on it. You know what I mean? It's not terribly confusing. We can still talk about shifts in it, right? What if there's an increase in technology that makes it both easier to produce apples and, computers, right? Then it's going to be this kind of shift completely outwards. So if this is our goods and services, if this is our capital stock, right? If this is our PPF, and if we have some sort of technological change that impacts both these kind of sectors, right? Then it's going to be this, even shift outwards, right? Rather than, what if we had just, a green revolution or something, right? If we had some situation where there was just an increase in like I said, what if, there's people that are, trying to figure out ways to genetically alter, like ladybugs and praying mantises and other kind of like good, like pests like that, right? So that we don't have to use herbicides and pesticides. What if that happens? And there's, this advance in the amount of food production and other kinds of things like that, but it doesn't necessarily reflect in terms of our capital stock, right? It would be just more of a pivot. We wouldn't really be increasing the amount of things that we could produce in terms of that sector of the economy, right? We would just be increasing the amount for the food sector, or whatever the case may be. So we learned this first to kind of just like familiarize ourselves with economics and kind of what's going on, right? But essentially this model it's missing the core of what economics is, right? So what economics is talking about, what is the thing that helps to kind of like allocate resources and allocate people's time, right? Why do you choose one job over another? The price of the hour of your time, right? Why do you buy one shirt over another or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, it's the price of things. So there's no prices in these models, right? These are models of things, which makes a lot of sense to us because we live in a very concrete world and we're touching things, you know what I mean? Like, but at the end of the day, we're constantly valuing things and we're constantly, we know the price of things, right? I mean, we even have game shows that are all just based on guessing the price of things, right? And so at the end of the day, this production possibility frontier model is going to be really a relic, I hate to say. We're not going to use it very much, right? And the bread and butter of economics and of this next 6 weeks is going to be the supply and demand model, okay? And so we're going to learn how these curves summarize. So demand is summarizing the behavior of the buyers, and supply is summarizing the behavior of the sellers, right? Supply starts with S, seller starts with S. We're going to discuss how they interact. We're going to talk about essentially why do we end up at that price, and then why does that price result in a certain amount of something being produced, right? I don't know if you guys have been to like Denver or other cities lately, but all those friggin' birds and scooters and everything like that, right? They're everywhere, and I hate them. But the economist in me is like, well, I see them everywhere. Like, demand must be there because the equilibrium quantity is freaking everywhere. Like you can't avoid them. Like they're on every corner. So, and I see people riding them all the time too. Without helmets. I'm like, oh god. But anyways, that's a whole other rant. We're going to talk about essentially how to kind of deconstruct news stories and look at, okay, so this is what happened, and we think that the price is going to increase or decrease, or this is what happened, and that's the reason why, or this is kind of an explanation for why, there was a shortage of iPhones back in the day, or that's or toilet paper, right, that just happened, and all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk about that kind of stuff, and we've got a couple of kind of core principles here that we'll explain, right? So don't worry about them right now, but just efficiency, this notion that I'm going to squeeze everything I can out of something, and an equilibrium principle, no cash on the table. It's saying that, everything that is wanted is sold, and everything that somebody wants to sell finds a buyer. So it's kind of this fanciful situation that doesn't really exist in real life, right? In real life, there actually ends up being either a lot of stuff that sits on the shelves of Walmart for a long time and then goes in the clearance aisle and I get it for like $3, or it ends up being like all of a sudden I can't get paper towels again, right? Like, so it's not as if things really exist in this equilibrium all the time. But we are we're very lucky to live in this developed country that is, one of the highest, the highest per capita income country in the world, right? And so we are used to this equilibrium principle, right? We're used to whatever we kind of want being there. And that's part of the reason why everybody freaked out so much when there was that shortage, like it was just because it was another uncertainty on top of, it was another strangeness on top of the existing kind of situation, right? Okay, so we already talked about kind of part of this, right? The what, how, and for whom, right? So what goods are going to be produced, how much of each, and so we know that back in the day, the command economies, there was a king, there were feudal lords, your dad was a cobbler, or your dad was a baker, you know, you were a cobbler, you were a baker, right? If you were the firstborn son, you replaced that person, right? And so we don't have that anymore. So how are these goods going to be produced? How are the laborers going to be provided, right? And so through all of this stuff, the answer really is you know, prices, right? Wages and prices. Same thing, how much of each? It's going to be based on the profit, the perceived profit that that person is going to make on that, right? That's why somebody would switch from growing, you know, corn to wheat or something, Gesundheit. You know, and then how, right? What resources are going to be used? What technology? Are you going to upgrade to the latest and greatest, you know, tractor and 4x4 with GPS so that your ranch hands don't get lost, right? Or are you just going to go with the thing that you've been using forever, or tell them that they got to walk, or, you know, like, and so, you know, are you going to, you know, use, you know, what kind of fertilizer, what kind of other things? So the different resources and technology you use kind of are very important, both for the macro and for the, you know, the society writ large, right? And then, you know, how are they distributed, right? And so this is that for whom question, right? So, you know, are we gonna, you know, take a look at everybody and just distribute it by need? Or are we gonna distribute it based on how much they're providing in terms of the value added to the product, right? And that's kind of what we do right now, right? So instead of by need, we base it off of, you know, essentially at the crudest level, if you were a middle manufacturer and you got a bunch of, you know, pieces of wood or something, right, to put together to make a birdhouse, you know, you get paid the difference between that final price of the birdhouse and the price that all of the materials cost, right? That's your value added. Now, of course, these supply chains and services and stuff are way more complicated than that, right? But at the end of the day, that's the gist of it, right? And so we're like, your income or your wage is supposed to reflect your productivity for that final product or service that is being provided, right? And that's why there's a lot of things that are kind of tied to performance, you know, so you get tipped when you're working, you know, as a barista or a waitress or a waiter, right? You know, if you sell cars or whatever, you know, you get a commission based off so much above the bare bottom MSRP or something. I don't exactly know how it works. I got a buddy that works there. I know a little bit. But, you know, there's these kind of incentive schemes, right? To kind of, you know, make sure that your interest is aligned with the interest of the owner or of the people that are trying to sell the machines or whatever the case may be. So central planning, right? We had small groups of people. This was kind of how it was back in the day. You know, the Soviet Russia, you know, a lot of the satellite states really tried it. You know, they set up goals that are output-based goals, and then they just say that, you know, okay, you need to make 70,000 shoes, and shoes are $5 a shoe. And they like never checked up on how much the shoes cost to make, and they never checked, you know, they never checked up on the quality of shoes, right? And so there was a lot of surplus, there was a lot of shoddy workmanship, there was a lot of things that, you know, the market would have probably corrected for that were gunked up in this central planning system, if that makes any sense. So the individual influence, right, that kind of like voting with your dollar was severely limited, right? And so in the market system, ideally, we signal to the different producers and sellers what we want, right? And as a result, the different workers and the different, you know, resources are going to go there. A bunch of leather isn't going to go to some shoe factory that's going to make some thin shoes that nobody wants, right? Like the leather is going to go and make, you know, quality bicycle seats or something, right? Because that's what I want. So the interaction of the demand and supply is going to answer those questions. And again, that price, that demand and supply, they're going to make an X, and they're going to form this, you know, you're kind of going to find X marks the spot. They're going to make a price. And that's really the signal. When they talk about the signal, it's the price signal. That's the core of economics, is talking about this price signal. And so it's important to note that there's no pure market economy, right? And so, you know, we watch the videos and, you know, about how, you know, we don't want to be a hammer, that we're just looking for nails and kind of see everything as a problem that, you know, we need to, you know, minimize disutility and maximize revenue or something like that, right? Like we, you know, almost every economy is a mixture, right? There's some central planning, there's, you know, safety nets, there's food stamps, there's support for children, there's, support for school lunch programs and things like that, right? And there are various very good reasons because of what we call externalities, right? If we don't, like, think about what are children? Children are the workforce of the future, right? So if we don't kind of, by raising children, parents are actually providing an externality, this external benefit to society. And so, these programs that kind of provide, like extra lunches or extra food to these children, I feel like are very justified, because the children, we want healthy children. They're going to be smarter, they're going to be more productive, and they're going to make for better workers, right? And so at the end of the day, one of the things we found too, over and over and over again in economic experiments, is the best bang for your buck is at like pre-kindergarten or kindergarten. And then it's just like lower and lower and lower effectiveness in terms of your return on your money. And there's just a certain amount of like, you can't teach a 50-year-old truck driver that's been driving trucks for 30 years how to be a data analyst programmer, right? Like, it's very difficult, and so spending the money early on is oftentimes a better tact, right? All right, so the market for any good consists of all the different buyers and sellers, right? So we used to have, like actual like traveling markets, in the feudal days, like they would travel through France and other kind of places, right? It'd be like a kind of, big deal, like the market is here, right? And then then it became a typical kind of thing in the agora, right? Like the city center, there would be, some people would have a market, right? And now, they're everywhere, right? And we've got online marketplaces, and so markets are multivaried in our definition in modern day, right? And so essentially we have different motivations. The sellers, they want to flip their product and they want to make a profit, right? This is why, you can't find a ring fit for anything under $120. I don't know if anybody like plays Switch here, video games or whatever, but ring fit is this like circle thing that goes onto the Switch, and it's like, because of quarantine and everything, people haven't been going to the gym, and it's really well rated, and so they've just been sold out, and everybody's been reselling them for $40 more than what they normally cost. It's just like straight up price gouging, and it's been happening now for like 6 months. And Nintendo's like trying, they kind of like keep pushing them out, like every once in a while, on Reddit, they'll be like, oh, Target's got them up, blah blah blah, and like you go a day later, like they're all sold out again, and so it's this behavior, people are wanting to make a profit, right? So they see this opportunity. That's part of what happened with the toilet paper and the hand sanitizer and stuff, right? They were like, I'm gonna hoard this stuff and then I'm gonna, sell it or trade it on the neighborhood app, right? You guys saw those stories about people that were trading rolls of toilet paper for like, crazy, like, like actual valuable stuff, like on the neighborhood watch app or whatever, right? Because people were just in a tizzy and kind of driving the price up, right? With their expectations of future price increases, right? So that's actually one of the more difficult demand shifters. And so it's kind of cool that we have this recent example so that we're not going to forget that, right? So the market price, the thing at the end of the day that, is that signal, is the balance of the two forces, right? So there's a cost to produce and there's a kind of profit that each seller is looking to kind of recoup their time, right? Because they're losing time by going out and pounding the pavement and trying to sell you this stuff, right? And so it's not just the cost for them to produce, it's also they want to make up their own money that they could have made if they had went and, just worked a job during that time instead of ran this business and tried to sell you this thing. And then we're going to derive value from the good, right? When we buy stuff, we enjoy it. And so, we have what's called like a reservation price, like, so when you see something and you're like, oh, that's awesome. If that's less than $15, I'm going to buy it. That $15, that's your reservation price. And so then when you buy it for $20, you end up getting this extra little like $5, what we call consumer surplus, like that warm little glowy feeling, when you're happy that you bought something that wasn't as expensive as you would have paid for, right? Okay, so demand curve. A demand curve slopes downwards. So I get this confused all the time. That's why I try to give you guys as many mnemonics as I can, right? They both start with D. Demand curve slopes downward. D, 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 right? And so, and the reason why this is because as the price decreases, demand increases. So you can also think about your behavior. Well, as the price of something decreases, does that mean that you're going to be buying more of it or less of it? As long as the quality stays the same, you're going to be buying more of it, right? And so if you forget that it's downward sloping, you can just kind of do a little kind of visualization about, well, what happens if the price goes from $4 to $2? Am I going to be buying one pizza a month, or am I going to be buying 2 or 3 pizzas a month? And I'm going to be buying 2 or 3 pizzas a month, right? If the kind of price per slice decreases that much. And so this is just a law of nature, essentially, right? So we talk about how economics is the observation of people in reality, and we're trying to distill it down to, these principles or laws or theories or whatever, right? And so this is one of these laws of demand, right? That as the price increases, consumers buy more at lower prices, and then, flip side of that, obviously, is at higher prices we're gonna consume less, right? So what happened when the toilet paper shortage hit, right? So Walmart and these other places could have totally jacked the prices up. Well, actually, could they have? That's a good question. Could they have? Yes or no? Yes, very good. It is. Yes, so it's called price gouging, right? And so there's a certain amount of price increases that are during times like this, that if you do that, you can get in trouble, and then the penalties are like 3 times the amount of whatever profit you made from it or something like that, So I grew up in Florida during a lot of those hurricanes and stuff like that, right? And so people would do that all the time, right? They go buy up all the plywood, they buy up all the bottled water, and then they'd like essentially try to be like the ice cream man of these disaster areas and go and sell this stuff to people, and people would not be happy about it, right? And so luckily we didn't really see any of that, at least in the store level. I mean, we saw it in the reselling level with the neighborhood apps and things like that, right? But then what ended up happening, right? Because they didn't increase the price, there ended up being a shortage of it, right? And so we'll get to a graphical representation of that in a second, right? But so what if there was just higher prices? What if I remember everybody at the time being like, is there like something going on with the trees or with like the factory? You know what I mean? Like, what's going on? Like, and it's like, no, everything's fine with the supply lines, right? But what if there was actually something happening with the supply lines and the price were to go up, right? Well, people would end up buying less toilet paper. And buying less toilet paper, what did end up people doing? They ended up buying substitute goods, right? What was the substitute good that they bought instead of toilet paper? What was the number one thing that kind of spiked in online sales during that time? It's one of those butt washer things. What are they called? Bidet. Yeah, bidet, right? So so that you don't have to use toilet paper, right? So people were like, oh man, and so they just immediately went out and just bought bidets online, right? And it's so funny because it's like half of my friends went and did that, and most of them haven't even installed it yet, right? And it's just they're just sitting there, and I'm just like, yeah, exactly. But that was a comforting behavior, right? They were worried that maybe toilet paper was going to run out forever or something, right? And so they went and they bought this substitute good instead, hoping that their demand for this staple, right, was going to just decrease because they were going to be doing this alternate behavior, right? All right, so we already talked about the reservation price, the highest price you're willing to pay for it. So you go in the store, you say, oh, that's a sweet shirt. If that's $12 or I'm going to get that or whatever, but it's $15, so I'm not going to buy it, right? So the demand, though, when we're talking about the curve, is not just talking about you. It's talking about you and your friend and me and everybody that could want a Chadron State Eagles T-shirt, essentially, right? Like that's the entire market. So when we talk about the demand curve, we're not just talking about a single person. We're talking about a whole community or a whole fan group or whatever the case may be, a whole nation sometimes, right? So lower prices obviously bring more buyers into the market, right? Because it's just, why wouldn't you want more of something? You're already buying it. Why wouldn't you want more of it if it's cheaper? What's the underlying assumption here? There's an underlying assumption here we don't really think about just because we're so used to thinking about goods and more goods are better, right? But what if you were really broke and you were buying a bunch of ramen noodles and Walmart brand peanut butter and what I mean, and and you made some more money, would you buy more of that? Or would you change to maybe buying some soup or frozen dinners, maybe cooking your own meals or something, you know what I mean? And so there are certain goods, I just want to tell you this right now, there are certain goods that don't necessarily respond normally, right? And so we actually have different names. We have a normal good. That's essentially a good that, it's a computer, it's a video game, it's clothing, right? It's like the more that you make, the more that you want it. The cheaper it is, the more that you want it, right? But then we also have other goods that are called inferior goods. And we'll talk about that in a bit. And so that's just, it's a different type of good, right? It's that ramen noodle, it's the bus pass, it's essentially, you know, when you make more money, you kind of stop, you know, consuming that good, right? That good was a stopgap measure. It wasn't necessarily your ideal choice, right? And so we have to account for those goods because you know, they are a significant portion, right? You know, the Dollar General is full of them, you know, and unfortunately too many places like just have access to a Dollar General and don't have access to a Safeway or a Walmart. And so that's like the only kind of grocery store that they have, you know. Okay, so this actually leads well into the different kinds of, you know, what are the effects, right? So I just kind of started talking about it, the income effect, right? That, you know, if the price of toilet paper goes up, then my overall purchasing power every week goes down, right? Because this good that I purchase is now more expensive. Substitution effect, I switched to a different thing. I went and I bought a bidet online. So this is part of the explanation for why lower prices increase demand, higher prices lower demand for things. And it's key for you to kind of start thinking about how price itself influences the quantity demanded. So on this, we're going to have, and so the other thing that's kind of difficult to figure out which axis we're labeling, right? So this we can just do, it's another mnemonic, you're just doing the alphabet in your head, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, price, P, Q, quantity, right? So there's price and then quantity. Very easy to get those mixed up. And then again, right, we've got a downward sloping demand curve. Right? And it's important to keep in mind that price is one of the axes, right? So you're going to want to say the price decreases so the demand shifts out. And that never happens. The price decreases, and so there's a movement along the demand curve, right? It's already built into the demand curve that when the price goes from $4 to $2, more people are going to want pizza. So by saying that like there's an extra shift or whatever, right? Because we're going to talk about how these kind of curves jump around a little bit. You can never, ever say that the price is the thing that does the shift. And the way that I like to think about the shifts, the way I teach the shifts is like, you can only say there's a shift if it falls in one of these kind of like categories, right? Like, you know, like whack-a-mole clowns or something, right? Like there's like, or like little kid, you know, again, like little ball thing that can fall down. It has to fit in one of these buckets, otherwise it's not a shift, okay? And so we'll talk about them in a second. Okay, so demand for pizza, given the price, how much are they gonna buy, right? So this is just reading the curve. So this, we would say that the price is reflecting on the demand curve, and at $2, there's 16,000 slices demanded. Now, does this actually mean that there's 16,000 slices that are sold? No, right? We've only got like half of the picture right now. All right. It's 238. Okay, I wanted to, so real quick, so the book talks about this great, or modern times, yeah. So the book talks about how, so just kind of our video break. So this specialization thing and you know, the gains from trade, you know, it's great, right? You know, in terms of, you know, in theory and on paper, it allows for everybody to, you know, kind of focus on the stuff that they want to focus on and then trade, and then everybody's better off, right? But there's a couple of things that end up happening that's not so good, right? You know, you may end up, if you're a developing country, you know, Jamaica or someplace like that, right? You may end up kind of getting stuck producing low value added or like low price goods, you know? So you're just constantly like, you're never gonna get rich exporting bananas and other stuff like that, right? And so these countries can get kind of caught in this trap, this free trade trap, where they're not climbing what we call the value-added ladder, right? They're not, you know, going from, you know, like they just, all they do is export, you know, coffee beans or whatever, and they're not starting to, you know, roast the coffee themselves and, you know, brand it and sell it and all that kind of stuff, right? And so that's the macro impact, right? Now, what's the micro impact? So remember that guy Adam Smith talked about back in the day. He was the founder of economics, and so one of the things that he said, he was like amazed by, you know, in the 1700s, he went to this pin factory, and he was like, oh, so there's one person does this, another person does this, and I've seen a manufacturer, there's only 10 people employed, right? But they're exerting themselves, and they're all working together, and they're all specializing on one thing. So 10 people can make 40,000 pins a day. So each person making a 10th part of those 48,000 could be making 4,800 pins in a day. But if they'd all worked separately, and without them having been educated to this peculiar business, they could not, each of them, have made 20, perhaps not even one pin in that day, right? And so it's this notion that by splitting up all the tasks and teaching this person, okay, here's how to put the nail head on the pin or whatever, right? And then here's, okay, and you're gonna be the one that sharpens to make sure that this is right, you know, like, and that's all that they do, and they specialize, and they kind of made this little assembly line, right? That's the reason why, you know, the Henry Ford, you know, automobile became the standard in the world, right? Is because of the fact that it's two reasons, right? He was one of the first to set up this manufacturing line and have them be super, super efficient, and then he also priced it low enough that his typical worker, and also essentially the typical worker of the day, could afford it. Right? And so instead of pricing it as this luxury, like, you know, only the rich of the rich get it, he was one of the first, you know, he said like, oh no, they're, you know, $25,000 or whatever, right? And so as a result, everybody was able to participate, and you know, they just grew because of that success, right? Okay, so the bad parts about this, right, is essentially there's a heavy psychological toll on workers, right? You know, so all means for the development of production, Marx writes, mutilates the laborer into a fragment of a man, degrades him to a level of an appendage of a machine, destroys every remnant of charm in his work, and turn it to hated toil. And I'm sure we've probably had some jobs that are similar, maybe not so bad, but, you know, like similar, right? You know, where we have no agency, there's not a lot of creativeness, we don't have a lot of, you know, final say on the output or whatever the case may be, right? And so this is best captured by Charlie Chaplin, the old, you know, silent film star, working in a machine. We'll just watch a couple minutes and then we'll get back. So that's pretty much the rest of it. So it just drives him mad, right? Like he just like loses his mind. It's so monotonous, it's so rote that, you know, he goes nuts. And so this is 1936 and they're satirizing it. You know what I mean? So it was like obviously, you know, not anything to kind of, you know, laugh at. So these slides. not as if it was completely unfounded or whatever, right? This was definitely something that people were experiencing significantly at the time. And still do a lot to this day, you know what I mean? Working at call centers, working at IT help desks, right? I mean, it's just like, it's rote and monotonous and it's tough. That's why you always want to give those people 5 stars, because essentially if you don't give them 5 stars, anything else their bosses see as a failure. 4 stars and 3 stars are like reasons to fire people in that industry. It's really weird, yeah. Okay, so there's just another demand if we, if we said given a quantity to be sold. So this isn't really the right way to interpret it, but essentially if we only had 8,000 slices, what would be the marginal consumer willingness to pay? So, if we only had 8,000 slices, then, at $4 a slice, we would think that, everybody would be buying it. It's I don't know. It's much easier to talk about, at a given price, so many people are demanding something, rather than the marginal consumer, right? So again, anytime we see this word marginal, we can just kind of substitute it out for incremental, or like the next consumer, right? So this is saying the next consumer. So they've already sold 7,000. It's a food cart that's set up right in front of the school, and they've sold 7,999 slices, and they're selling the 8,000 slice, and they were trying to sell it for $4.50 and nobody would buy it, and then they said $4 and somebody was like, I'll buy it. That's kind of what it said. It's kind of stupid, but that's what they're saying. That's the marginal consumer, okay? All right, so supply curve. So let's real quick just talk and define the supply curve, and then we will finish chapter 3. Or this chapter 3? Yeah, chapter 3. We'll finish this on Wednesday before we kind of talk about chapter 4 and 5, which, I mean, we've already talked a lot about chapter 4, so it's not going to be that much. And again, this is the bread and butter. We got to really understand what these supply curves and demand curves are, right? So the supply curve is telling us about the suppliers, right? Suppliers, the sellers, okay? What they're willing to offer, what they're willing to sell at, right? Why is the opportunity cost going to be different? Some people are going to have technology that make it so that it's much cheaper for them to produce whatever that is, right? The skills that are involved, right? If it's some handmade good, somebody might have been doing it forever. It might only take them a half hour compared to 4 hours or something, right? And so they're willing to part with it for less or something, right? Or if there's skills, they've been doing it for 50 years, they only make $3 a year, you're going to pay $7,000 for it, right? So it could go the other way. Different costs such as rent, right? There's a lot of goods that, might be cheaper here compared to Denver just because the rent and the cost of the overhead, cost of living is cheaper here. And then expectations, right? If you think that your good is going to be worth more in the future, then you're not going to sell it at a low price right now, right? You're in no rush. So the expectation of the future state of the market has a real influence in terms of your opportunity cost, right? Kind of what you're giving up by selling it. So low-hanging fruit principle, right? So we all understand this concept of low-hanging fruit. If we find some fruit tree in the middle of the road, right? Are we going to climb to the top of the fruit tree to get the fruit? No, like we're just going to, if there's low-hanging ripe fruit, we're just going to get it and just eat that right there. And so similar kind of situation going on with the supply curve in terms of at the suppliers that are supplying at the lowest part of it are the people that have the easiest kind of the easiest way of it, right? They have the highest technology, the lowest overhead, and things like that, and so they're still able to be a part of the market even when the price is really low. A reservation price is that lowest price, right? So you meet somebody on the road and they, you're really cold and you want their sweater, and they say, well, it's going to be $20 or something. Oh, actually, it's a funny story. Something very non-Nebraska happened to me last year when I was driving around, and before I had like a chain and everything on my Subaru, right? And somebody spun out, coming out of the Walmart, and they were like in that, big snowbank right in front of the Hibbets or whatever the case is. And I tried to like get out and like help them push and dig it out, but it was like pretty bad. And somebody came by with a truck and he was like, hey, you want some, like, what's going on? You stuck there? And we're like, haha, yeah, like obviously. And he's like, well, you got $20? And they were like, what? And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, like I'll pull you out for $20. And we were like, And he was like, I mean, you could go buy a shovel at Walmart for $10 and spend the next half hour digging yourself out. You could just give me $20 right now and I'll pull you out. And I was just like, I think he probably should just give him the $20. Like, he has a point. Like, it's not really that cool of him, but you know, like, it's probably your best move right now, given everything, you know. And they were like, thanks for your help. And they're just so dejected. They gave him the money, and he pulled them. I think he pulled them out, right? I left, but yeah. So that was the, you know, he was like, well, what's the reservation price? You know what I mean? Like 40 is probably too much, but I bet like $20 I'll be able to sell them the service of pulling them out of the snow bank in the middle of the winter, right? So, so we'll pick up here in class on Wednesday. If you guys have any questions, send me an email. Come to office hours. I got some office hours tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, 9:30 to 11, and then office hours Wednesday, 1 to 2. So yeah, have a great one. Talk to you guys soon.